Good
Russia's
evening, Canada.
strategy inside Ukraine
I'm
is
Walter
simple.
Smith, and
Get
this
as
is
many
Canada
soldiers
Tonight.
as it can to
Tonight
the
is a
front
pipeline
so that
night,
they can wear down
and I mean that
Ukraine's
in the best
defenses.
possible way.
But that strategy
In
can
the
only
past
work when
week,
soldiers
in the
are
past few
actually
days
getting
alone,
to the front.
4 major
That isn't
pipeline
happening.
stories have
Something
broken
is killing
that, taken
90%
together,
of Russian
tell us
soldiers
something
before they ever
profound
make it
about
to
where
where Putin
Canada's
needs them to
energy
be.
future is headed.
Those soldiers are dying before
Story
they ever
1.
fire a single shot.
Just
as they're
today,
being
April
taken out
16th,
before the fight even
2026,
starts.
Donald
Yuri
Trump signed new
Kochinov reveals
pipeline
all.
permits facilitating
The
the
Russian war
transport of
correspondent
Canadian
and
crude
military
oil
blogger has
across
revealed
the
the
U.S.
vast
border.
majority of Russia's soldiers
Story
are
2.
dying before they ever
The
get
Trans
close to being
Mountain
in a position
Pipeline,
where they can
Canada's
attack
only
Ukraine on the
oil
front.
export route to the
Kochinov
Pacific
declares,
coast,
consider
is
these
running at
figures.
full
80 to
capacity
90%
for the
of
first time
Russian
in its
personnel
history,
losses occur
driven by
already at the
surging
stage of
Asian
advancing
demand
toward the
caused
line
by
of
the
contact,
Iran war.
not on the line
Story
of contact,
3.
merely
The
advancing
Keystone
to reach
XL
it.
pipeline
In other words,
revival is
Kochinov
advancing
continues,
with real
8
numbers.
or 9 out of 10
a $2
soldiers,
billion
average
project with
85%,
capacity to move
are
over
killed
1
on the
million
way
barrels
without
per
ever
day
engaging the
of
enemy
Canadian
or even
crude
seeing them.
into the United
With
States.
just a few words,
Story
Kochinov
4.
has revealed the
The
cancer
West
that is
Coast
eating away at the
Pipeline,
entire Russian
the
military.
potential game
Over
changer that would give
1.31
Alberta
million of
direct
Russia's soldiers
access
have
to
died
Asian
or been
markets,
wounded in a
has a
war
July
where many
1st
haven't even
deadline
laid
for
eyes
its
on their
first
enemy.
major regulatory
Putin's patsies
submission.
are fighting
And the
ghosts.
clock is
They're being
ticking.
told to move forward
4
toward
stories,
locations they'll never
1
reach.
week,
And they're
and
being
all of
put
them
out of their
pointing in the
misery
same
in the
direction.
rear without
Canada's
ever having fired a
pipelines
shot
are the
in
most
anger.
important
There's no
infrastructure
point in
story in
training.
this country
Preparation
right now.
means nothing for up to
Tonight,
90%
Canada
of Russian
Tonight
troops.
breaks down
They
every
exist
single one
solely
of these
to die
stories.
to an enemy that they
The
can't
facts,
even see.
the numbers,
And
the
as you are soon
opportunities,
going to learn,
and the
that
honest
enemy
challenges
isn't
that still
always
need to be
Ukraine.
addressed.
Sometimes
Let's get
it's an
into
enemy
it.
that is far closer
Let's start
to
with the
home.
news that broke today.
Before we get to that,
because
there's the
this is
enemy
the
that
most
Russia's soldiers
immediate
are fighting at a
and in
distance.
some ways the
Ukraine
most
has been
surprising
crippling Russia's
development.
spring offensive,
On
along with many
Wednesday,
of the
April
assaults that Putin
16th,
has ordered beforehand,
2026,
because it has made it
Donald
almost
Trump signed
impossible for
several
Russia to launch
pipeline
the kinds of
permits
massive
facilitating the
assaults that it used to gain
transportation of
territory
Canadian
earlier in
crude
the war.
oil and
Those
petroleum
assaults, which
products
combined
between
armor and
Canada
artillery with
and the
infantry,
United States.
still led to huge losses
The
for
permits
Russia,
were issued
but
to
at least they made
Enbridge,
progress.
Canada's
At least
largest
Russia's
pipeline
forces were
company,
fighting an enemy
for
that
the
they could
maintenance
see,
and
so they
operation
died
of
knowing that
existing
just maybe
pipelines
they had
at
helped
border
their country
crossing
make an
locations in
advance.
North Dakota and
Now,
Michigan.
not even that is happening.
Now, a
The
Canadian
Institute for
government
the Study of
spokesperson
War,
confirmed that
ISW,
these
highlighted
permits
why in
pertain to a
February
previously
2025
announced
where it
private
explained how
sector-led
Russia has failed
optimization
time and time again to
and the
break
operation
Ukraine.
of an existing
The massive
pipeline.
losses that Russia has
And a senior
experienced on the
government
equipment
official
front have made
confirmed
it so
on
that the
background
country can't
that
sustain the
these
sorts of
permits are
assaults that we
not
saw
directly
earlier in the
related
war.
to the broader
Even back
energy
then,
partnership
ISW
negotiations
analyst Christina
between the
Harwood
Carney
was
government
predicting that
and the
Russia
Trump
wouldn't be
administration
able to
on
continue a
Kuzma.
sustained war effort
So what does
against
this
Ukraine
mean?
unless it
These are
mobilized to
operational
get its hands
permits.
on more manpower.
They keep existing Canadian
Mobilization
oil
hasn't
flowing
happened.
south across the border.
But it's seeming
They
to
are
be
not on
increasingly
their own
likely as
the
Ukraine
big new
builds upon a
pipeline
strategy
deal.
that is killing up to
But they are
90% of
significant for
Russia's
2
soldiers
reasons.
before they get to the front.
First,
And
they
that
show that
strategy is
even in the
built
middle
upon
of the
one
trade
clear
tensions
fact.
between Canada
Ukraine
and the United
keeps
States,
adapting as Russia
the
is
energy
locked into doing
relationship
nothing more than
continues to
throwing more
function.
cannon fodder at
Oil
defenses
is flowing.
that it increasingly can't
Pipelines are
reach.
operating. The
The
practical
battlefield has
energy
changed far
interdependence
beyond
between our
Russia's
two
reckoning.
countries is real.
In 2022
and
and
it is being
2023, it was
maintained.
possible to launch assaults
Second,
using large
they are a
quantities of
signal.
armor.
Trump has been publicly supportive of
Russia had the
expanding
numbers and was
Canadian
making
energy
progress.
access to American markets.
By 2024,
These permits
armor
keep
was
the
being replaced
infrastructure
by
working,
nimbler vehicles
while
such as
bigger decisions
motorcycles.
are being made.
And it was possible
And
for
those
Russia to
bigger
make progress
decisions
that way.
on Keystone XL,
By 2025,
on the
the
broader
bikes were
energy
becoming less
partnership,
effective, but Russia
on
continued
Kuzma
to throw meat
are
into the
coming.
grinder by having its soldiers
The energy
sneak through
relationship
forested
between
areas
Canada and
in
the
small
United States is
infiltration groups.
complicated right
By
now,
that point, a Russian
but it
soldier
is
was
not broken.
extremely lucky to
And
even get to
today's
their
permits
target.
are evidence
In
of that.
2026, the
Now
vast
let's talk about
majority
the
don't
pipeline
make
story
it.
that is
And the
perhaps
reason
the
why
most
can be summed up
immediately
in two
significant
words that
for
define what
Canada's
Ukraine has
economy.
created and mastered
Trans
during
Mountain.
4 years of war.
The Trans
Kill
Mountain
zones.
pipeline system,
As Ukraine has
which carries
improved its drone
Alberta oil
technology,
from
the kill
Edmonton
zones
to
that
a
already
marine
stretched
terminal
for
in Burnaby,
miles beyond
British
the front
Columbia,
lines
is
have only grown
expected to
deeper
operate
and
at full
more effective.
capacity in April
LRT
and
took
into
us
May
inside those
as a
kill
result
zones
of
in a March
energy
17
disruptions
piece,
caused by the war in
explaining
the
that
Middle
it's because
East.
of these zones that there is
This
no
is a
longer
major
even a clear
milestone.
front line for
The
Russian
Trans Mountain
soldiers to reach in
expansion
Russian
project,
territory.
a $34
Kill zones are
billion
defined by the
investment that
range
took
that drones
years of
can reach,
controversy,
LRT explains.
legal battles,
Earlier
and
in the
political
war, when
drama
Russia
to
was making its
complete,
best progress,
began
FPV
transporting
drones could
oil
only
from
travel for
Edmonton
about
to
5
Metro
7
Vancouver
kilometers,
in
3.1
May
to 4.3
2024.
miles. The
For
kill
its
zones were
first
still
year and a half
treacherous,
of
but Russian
operation,
soldiers had a much
it was
shorter
running
distance
below
to
full
trudge to get through
capacity
them.
as
And with
shippers
almost no
established
threat
new
being
market
posed to the Russian
relationships
rear,
and logistics.
Putin's forces were still able
The
to
Iran
advance.
war changed
Then
that.
something changed.
Asian buyers who
Ukraine's
had been
drones got
dependent on
stronger
Middle
and
Eastern
rangier.
oil are now
Once kill
scrambling
zones
for
that stretched for a
alternatives.
handful of miles
And Canadian
became
oil,
vast and
arriving
sweeping
via
swathes
Trans
of
Mountain
Ukrainian
to
terrain
Burnaby,
that were turned
then
into
loaded
no
onto
man's land
tankers
by
headed across
ever-present
the
drones.
Pacific,
FPV
is
drone
exactly what
ranges
they
have been
need.
expanded so they make
Trans
anywhere
Mountain
within 15
CEO put it
kilometers or
plainly at the
9.3
CERAWeek
miles of
Energy
front of
Conference
death
in
trap
Houston.
for Russia's soldiers.
There is a
But it
shift
gets even
underway
worse
to
for
North
Russia's
America
soldiers.
as a
In
source
late
of oil.
2025 and into 2026,
Asian customers
Ukraine
are
has also
highly
added
interested in
middle-range
Canadian
drones to its
barrels,
arsenal.
full stop.
Ukraine's
They
drone
like the
systems
country.
can now strike
They
Russia
like the
deeper
product
into its
that
rear
comes
than
to
ever
them.
before.
The twin
In
pipeline
some areas,
system
Ukraine's
currently
drones
moves
are wreaking
approximately
havoc over 144
890,000 barrels per
or
day
about 90 miles
between
behind
Alberta and the
frontline.
West Coast.
So Russia
And
now has a
Trans Mountain
double-edged
is not
problem.
stopping there.
People it's trying to
The
send
company
to the
is
front are
already
being mowed
moving
down
ahead
by
with not
FPV
one
drones.
but two expansion
And in the rear,
projects.
Russian soldiers are dying in
The
fruit
first
camps and
involves using
convoys.
drag-reducing
Ukraine is also
agents,
wrecking command and
a
control
relatively
centers and the Russian
low-cost
logistical
technology,
supply chain,
to
all because it
squeeze
has developed
approximately
drones that fly
10% more
deeper
oil
and hit
through the
harder
existing
than they have at
pipeline.
any other point in the war.
Construction on
Add
this
to all of this
project
the
begins in
constant,
August,
never-ending
costs
watchful
just
eye in the
$9 million,
skies. Ukraine's
and
kill
will be
zones
complete
being as
by
large as they
January
are, maybe you think
2027.
there will be plenty of blind
The
spots.
second
for Putin's
expansion
soldiers
is
to exploit.
larger and more complex,
There are some
involving new
inevitable,
pumping
but the
stations
blind
and
spots are
ultimately
kept to a
adding
minimum because Ukraine deploys
360,000
rotating
additional
waves of
barrels per day
reconnaissance
of
drones
capacity.
that watch everything that is
The
happening
original
below.
target for
These
completing this
eagle-eyed
project
drones
was
fly so high that
2029,
Russian soldiers can't
but
even
Trans
see them.
Mountain is
And when
already
there is even
ordering
the slightest
equipment
hint
with an
of
aim
movement,
of finishing
be that
by
of a soldier or a piece of
2028,
equipment,
a
which
year
is
ahead
being
of
back to
schedule,
Ukraine's drone
driven
operators
by the
behind front
urgency of
lines.
global
They
demand.
unleash whatever weapons are needed
This
to get rid of
project
the
still
threat,
requires
and the reconnaissance
regulatory
drones
approval.
continue watching.
Think about what this
Ukraine
means.
makes all of this
The
even
pipeline
worse
that
for Russia
everyone
by
argued
launching
about for
clever
years is now
counterattacks when
running
Putin's
full.
forces least
It
expect
is adding capacity
We've
ahead
reported
of
on
schedule.
Ukraine's insane
And
gains
Asian
during its
buyers are
February
lining up to
counteroffensive
buy
against
everything
Russia.
it can carry.
According to the Kyiv Independent,
This is what
Ukraine
Canada as
liberated around
energy
480
superpower looks
square
like in
kilometers,
practice.
or about 185
Now
square
let's talk
miles,
about the pipeline
predominantly in the
revival
south
that
of the
nobody
country,
thought was
by bringing
possible
the
just
front
2
lines
years
to
ago.
Russia.
Keystone
However, just as
XL.
impressive and often
The details that have
underreported are the
emerged
attacks
this
that Ukraine
month
has
put
been
real
launching
numbers
against
on what had
entrenched
previously
Russian
been a
forces
concept,
in what Putin's
and the
troops
numbers are
thought were
significant.
safe positions.
Bridger
Take the
Pipeline's
soldiers who were
proposed
hiding in
project to transport
Serebryansky
Canadian
forest in
crude
eastern
from the
Ukraine back in
U.S.-Canada
December as
border
an
to
example.
Wyoming would
Those
cost
Russian soldiers were
approximately
about
$2
6
billion
miles south of the settlement
and have the
of
capacity
Kremina,
to
and
transport
over 5
more than
miles
1
east
million
of the front
barrels of
line.
oil per
They
day,
had no reason to
according to
believe that they faced
filings
any kind
submitted
of
in
threat
late
from Ukraine.
March.
They weren't even
Let's
in the
be
kill
clear
zones,
about what this
or so
project
they thought.
actually is.
In an
The
impressive
company
raid
first
that combined
outlined
infantry,
plans in
special
January
forces and huge
to the
numbers of
Montana
drones.
Department of
Ukraine absolutely
Environmental
destroyed
Quality
the Russian
for a
position that was
pipeline
miles away
capable
from the
of
front.
transporting
Russia's total loss count was an
550,000 barrels
estimated
per day
2,000 troops.
of Canadian crude
Ukraine's pointed
from near the
counter-assault proved
U.S.-Canada
that Russia's
border in
forces
Phillips
are never
County,
safe.
the same
The
general
lion's share
area
of the
where
damage and the
Keystone
main
XL
reason why
would have
90%
crossed
of Russia's soldiers
through
are dying
eastern
before they hit the
Montana
front
and
is
into
obviously
Wyoming,
Ukraine. However,
terminating
there
near
is more at play
Guernsey.
here. The
The
enemy that is
pipeline would
closer to
span
home
nearly
for Putin's forces
650
is Russia
miles,
itself.
just over
And the country's
1,000
military and
kilometers,
strategy have
and
played
would
their
cost
own roles
approximately
in the plight
$2
that faces
billion
the soldiers
for the
now.
Montana
Before
portion
we go
alone.
deeper into that, this is a quick
At
reminder that
maximum
you are
capacity,
watching the military
with
show.
light
If you
crude
haven't
batching,
subscribed yet, now
it could
is the
move well
perfect
over
time
1
to take a
million
look.
barrels per day.
Let's talk strategy.
Bridger
Russia
Pipeline
has
is seen
tried
as a
to make
potential
small
U.S.
adjustments
partner
in its
for
assaults,
Canadian
as
company
we saw
South
earlier in
Bow,
its switches from
which
mechanized
was
to
spun off from the
motorcycle
original
infantry
Keystone
systems.
XL
These aren't good
developer
adjustments.
and owns
Each
sections
makes
of that
Russia weaker than the
infrastructure on the
last, but they
Canadian
are
side of
adjustments
the border.
nonetheless.
South Bow
However,
launched
the
an
one
open
thing they all have
season
in
in
common
March,
is that they see
which
Putin
means it
and
is
his inept
actively seeking
commanders
commitments
telling
from
Russia's
oil
hapless
buyers
soldiers that they
to
need
ship
move forward.
crude through the project,
No matter how they
from
do it or what
Alberta
the cost,
to
those
multiple
soldiers have
U.S.
to push.
destinations,
They're
including the
being
Gulf
treated like
Coast.
expendable resources.
The U.S.
and that,
Bureau
as
of
much as
Land
what
Management
Ukraine
is
doing,
accepting
is a
public
huge
comments
reason why
until
so
May
many are dying in
1st
kill zones.
on the environmental
As we
impact
speak,
of this
Russia is in the
project.
early stages of a spring
Public
offensive
meetings
that is
are being
supposed to
held
lead
in
to the fall
Montana
of the
and
nest.
Wyoming this
Again,
month.
all Russia can
Now,
do is push its troops
Canada
into Ukraine's
tonight always gives you
ever-expanding
the
kill
honest
zones.
picture.
The
There are
numbers from
still
the first
real
month of the
hurdles.
spring offensive tell
Guernsey,
the tale.
Wyoming is
In
not
March,
an end
Russia
market for
suffered a
crude
record
oil.
35,351
The project would still need additional pipeline
casualties.
links to
Now
reach
think
major
about what this
refining
means in the
hubs like
context
Cushing,
of Putin's
Oklahoma,
revelation.
and the Gulf Coast.
Of those 35,000,
Environmental opposition to this project, echoing the years-long fight against the original Keystone XL,
they died
has
before ever
already
reaching
begun.
those lines.
And the
That left
project
Russia
still
with a
needs what is
measly
called a presidential
3,536
permit,
soldiers who
formal
died while
approval
actually
from the
attacking
Trump
Ukraine.
administration
This is
to cross the
strategic
international
suicide.
border.
Even
But
if you
here
think
is what is
Putin's
different
approach of
from
using
every
Russia's manpower
previous
advantage
chapter
to
of the
wage an
Keystone
attritional war
XL
against Ukraine
story.
is a good idea.
This time,
That approach
the
only
Canadian
works when the
government
manpower
supports
is
it.
getting to the
This
front in high
time,
numbers.
the Alberta
That isn't
government
happening,
supports
and
it.
Russia's complete
And this
inability
time,
to come up
with
with a
global
strategy
oil
to
demand
overcome
surging
Ukraine's
because
kill
of the
zones
Iran
is a
war
huge reason
and
why.
Canadian oil more
So
valuable
Russia's
than ever,
strategic
the
incompetence is
economics have
feeding into
never
the
been
success of
stronger.
Ukraine's Russians' kill zone.
And now the big one.
But the other things that
the
Russia is
pipeline
doing
that could
are catching
truly
even its own
transform
soldiers
Canada's
off guard.
energy future.
When those soldiers
the
aren't
West
being
Coast
forced
pipeline
into death
from
marches
Alberta to
toward a
British
front line that
Columbia.
they'll never see,
Let's
they're
be
dying by
completely
other means.
honest tonight.
Suicides
Because
and
Canada
executions
tonight
are
does
becoming
not hide
increasingly
inconvenient
common
facts.
well behind the Russian lines.
The Carney-Smith
and both
MOU,
are sapping away at the
the
manpower
Memorandum
Putin
of
needs to make
Understanding
the
signed in
constant
November
assaults to the orders
2025
effective.
between the
Stories
federal
about Russian
government and
soldiers
Alberta
killing themselves
set a
are
series of
becoming
early
increasingly common, and
deadlines
those
for April
suicides are
1st,
sometimes accompanied
2026.
by those soldiers
Those
taking others
deadlines
with
were
them.
not met.
In October
The April
2025,
1st
the
targets
Moscow
included
Times
a
reported on
carbon
a Russian
pricing
service
equivalency
member
agreement,
who shot a fellow
a
soldier
methane
before
equivalency
pointing the gun
agreement,
at himself and
a
pulling the trigger.
trilateral MOU
This
with
happened
the
in the Moscow
Pathways
region.
Carbon
It gives
Capture
us a glimpse
Companies,
into the
and a
desperation and the
cooperation
brutality of
agreement
Russia's
on
military
environmental
causes
impact
in
assessments.
those who are ordered to fight
Premier
for.
Danielle Smith
The Russian
acknowledged
Defense
that these
Ministry's
targets
Moscow
would be
military
missed,
district tried to
while
play all of
saying
this
that
off as
she
an
does not
accident.
want to
It
delay
claimed that a
very
service
long.
member violated
The Federal
safety
Natural
rules for
Resources
handling
Minister
weapons,
has reaffirmed
which is what
Ottawa's
led to
commitment to the
shooting.
deal.
But other reports
Both
say that as many
governments
as
are
5
describing
Russian
the missed
soldiers have been
deadlines
injured in
as
the
a bump in the road,
That sounds more
not
like
a fundamental
spree
breakdown.
than an accident. And it
But the
being followed by a
challenges
suicide
are
makes
real.
it even worse.
The
These
Pathways
soldiers weren't even
Project,
inside
a
Ukraine.
major
They were taken
carbon
out of
capture
Putin's war.
initiative involving 20
Others are dying
Alberta
at the
oil
hands of
sands
their own
companies,
commanders.
is at the
In
center
February
of the deal.
2026, several
The
Russian
companies
soldiers
behind
told
it
the
have not
BBC
yet made a
that they
final
had seen
investment
comrades
decision.
die at the hands of their
The
commanders after they
negotiations on
refused to go
industrial
into
carbon
Ukraine's kill
pricing
zones.
policy are complex.
One claims to have seen a pit filled
An
with the
industry
bodies
has
of
raised
20 Russian
concerns about
soldiers
the
who had been
regulatory
zeroed
environment.
by their
However,
own commanders
and this is the
for
critical
refusing
point,
That's
the
enough
most
soldiers to
important
make up
deadline in
several
the
of the small
MOU is still
infiltration units
alive.
that Russia now uses in Ukraine.
Alberta's government has
And
committed
it
to
shows
submit
that
its
Putin's
pipeline
approach inside
proposal
his
to the
own
Major
military is
Projects
as brutal as
Office
his treatment
by
of the
July
cannon
1st,
fodder that is dying to
2026.
Ukraine's drones before they
That
even
is
reach
the
the front.
deadline that matters most.
Now add desertions into
That
this
is the
equation.
formal step that
United
moves the West
24
Coast
Media reported
pipeline
back
from a
in September
concept
that up to
to a live
70,000 of
regulatory
Russia's soldiers
process.
were expected to have
Alberta
deserted
is
their
currently
units by the end of
evaluating 5
2025.
potential port
Those are
locations in
soldiers
British
who have
Columbia
saved themselves
for
from
the
a brutal
pipeline
death,
terminal.
assuming they don't get caught.
The government is
More
engaged
importantly
with
for Russia,
indigenous
they are
communities
soldiers who
along
can't
potential
contribute to
routes,
assaults on the front.
and the MOU
Ukraine is taking
specifically
out 90%
requires
of Russia's
free,
soldiers before they
prior,
ever hit
and
the front.
informed
These
consent from
deserters are taking
indigenous
themselves
peoples
out of the
as a
fight
central
before either
part of the
Ukraine or
project's
Russia
development.
itself gets a chance.
No private
And
company
as for
has
those
yet
who
committed
stay
to
and head
build
on
or
their
purchase
unmerry
the West
way
Coast
into Ukraine's
pipeline
kill
project.
zones, even they're not
Alberta
being
Premier
treated with any
Smith
sort
has
of
expressed
respect by the
confidence
Russian
that
military.
foreign companies and
Soft
sovereign
reports
wealth
that the
funds
Ukrainian
will
partisan
step
group
forward once
Artesh
the
now claim that
regulatory
many of
pathway
Russia's
is
soldiers
clear.
are being
And
issued
here's the
with
context that
Soviet-era
makes
rifles.
all of this more
Those soldiers
urgent
are
than
getting
ever.
AKM and
Trans
AK-74s
Mountain
that
is
date back to
already
the
full.
1960s and 70s.
The Iran war
Poorly
has shown that
maintained and
Asian
unsuitable
buyers
for
will
a modern
take
war
every
environment.
barrel Canada
These
can
rifles are prone to
supply.
jamming and
The
misfire,
demand
which
for
further
Canadian
reduces the
energy
combat
is real,
effectiveness of Russia's units.
sustained, and
Imagine that.
growing.
You're one of the lucky
A West Coast
10% who
pipeline is
actually
not a
make it through the
speculative
kill zones
future
into the front.
project.
You raise
It
your
is an
rifle, pull the
economic
trigger,
necessity.
panic as the rifle
There is
jams,
one more
and then
element
die.
to this pipeline story that
And you still
cannot
did
be
better than
overlooked,
90% of
and
your
it is the one
comrades.
that changed this
So
week.
most of Russia's soldiers
Mark
die
Carney now
either
has
in
a
Ukraine's
majority
kill
government.
zones or due to Russia's inadequacy
Every one of the
and brutality
pipeline stories we
before
have
they ever
covered
get to the
tonight
front.
requires
Here's what
government
this means
action.
for the state of Russia's
Trans
war
Mountain's
against Ukraine
expansion
right now.
needs regulatory
Here's a hint.
approval.
It's not good.
The West Coast
Earlier we
pipeline
told
needs
you
to
that
pass
March
through
saw
the
Russia
major
break its
projects
2026
office.
record for the most
Keystone
soldiers that it's
XL
lost in a
needs
single month
active
of fighting.
diplomatic engagement with
Those
the United
losses might
States.
actually have meant something.
Under the
at least in
minority
Putin's
government of
callous
the
mind, if
past
they had
year,
led to some gains.
every
They
legislative
didn't.
and regulatory
According to The
move was
Independent,
slowed
Russia
by
made no
political
frontline gains
uncertainty.
during March, which
The
is the first
possibility
time
of a
in 2.5
confidence
years
vote,
this
the
has
need
happened.
to negotiate with
Ukraine made
opposition
gains.
parties on
Not
every
many,
major
but 9
decision.
square kilometers or
That is over.
3.47 square miles.
The majority
It's better than
government
nothing
gives
at all.
Carney the
And
tools to
Ukraine
move
didn't have
these
to burn
projects
through
forward
35,000
with a
of its
speed and
soldiers to make this
decisiveness
gains.
that was simply not
This is what
possible
happens when most of
before
your soldiers
Monday's
die
by-election
before hitting the
results.
front. The front doesn't
Fast-tracking
All
environmental
of this has to be
assessments,
humiliating for
passing
Russia,
the natural
considering the
resource
fact that
approvals
2025 was
legislation
hardly a banner
that has been
year for its
stalled
push
in
into
Parliament,
Ukraine. The national
making the
interest
diplomatic
says that Russia
moves with the
suffered an
Trump
estimated
administration on the broader energy
415,000
partnership
casualties
that is
in
being
2025.
negotiated alongside
Ankur
Kuzma.
Narayan, who is the
All
Counselor
of
for
it moves
Politico-Military
faster now.
Affairs at the UK delegation
And with the
of
July 1st
Organisation
West
for
Coast
Security
pipeline
and
deadline
Cooperation
and the
in
May
Europe,
1st
puts
public
the figure
comment
slightly
deadline
higher.
on the Keystone
Narayan
XL
claims Russia's
project,
2025
both coming in the
casualty
next 6
toll will be
weeks,
420,000.
there is no
Adds that
time to
Russia
waste.
endured those losses so that it
Before
could
we
get its hands
close,
on a paltry
Canada tonight must be
0.8%
honest about
Ukraine.
what is difficult.
These gains were made
Building
before
pipelines
Ukraine's
in
kill
Canada
zones
is
became
hard.
so effective that
It
they
has
destroyed
always been
90%
hard.
of Russia's troops.
The environmental assessment
And they were
processes
still
are lengthy.
pathetic.
Indigenous
Russia lost an
consultation,
entire army
which
in
is not just a
2025.
legal requirement
Several,
but a
in fact,
moral
depending on which
obligation,
nation you use
takes
as a barometer.
time and
The
cannot
UK
be rushed
itself itself
without
has only
creating larger problems down the road.
141,330 active
The West
personnel in
Coast
its military,
pipeline faces
which is
real
roughly a
questions
third of
about
what
its
Russia
route,
lost to take
its
less
port
than 1% of
location,
Ukraine in
its impact
2025.
on coastal waters.
And now Russia is doing even
The
worse than
Keystone
it was
XL
last year.
revival faces
Prominent voices
environmental
inside
opposition
Russia are starting to
and the
revolt.
political volatility
Kochynov,
of
who
the
made
Trump
the 90%
administration.
revelation, is just one of
Trans
them.
Mountain's
Military
expansion
bloggers
still
all over the
needs
country are
regulatory
turning their
approval
anger
for its
toward
second
Russia's
phase.
military command, and in some
These
cases,
challenges do
Vladimir
not mean
Putin.
the project should not
Alexei
proceed.
Sokonkin claims
They
that
mean the
Russia's
projects
commanders are
need
now
to be done
expending
right,
newly
with
arrived
genuine
recruits in
engagement,
an old-fashioned
genuine
way by
consultation,
treating them as a
and genuine
renewable
commitment
resource.
to protecting the
The new voice of
communities and
Ukraine
environments
reports.
along the
Another
routes.
military blogger named Alexander
What the majority
Khodorkovsky
government provides
claims that it
is
would be
not the
impossible
ability
for
to
Russia to
bulldoze
return
these
to the large assaults of
processes.
the past.
It provides
even if it
the
had the
stability
equipment,
to see them
as its
through,
losses would increase
to commit
eightfold
to the
with no real impact
timelines,
on the front.
to maintain the
Sokonkin's words in
political will
particular
even when the
demonstrate how
going gets
Putin has
hard.
failed to account for Ukraine's
That is what
transformation
Canada
of the
needs from
battlefield.
its government right now.
Russia's
Before
losses
I
are
let
now
you
so
go
high
tonight,
that it's failing
I
to
want to
replenish replenish them
back
through
and look at
volunteer
what this
recruitment.
week's pipeline
March
news
marked the
actually
fourth straight
means.
month in which Russia's
1
casualty
week
rate
ago,
was higher than its
Canada
recruitment
had a
rate,
minority
TVP
government
World reports.
and pipelines
A
that
renewable
were politically
resource, the
uncertain.
last thing that Russia's soldiers are.
Today,
They're starting
Canada
to become
has a
more valuable
majority
commodities-based
government, a
solely on the fact
trans-mountain
they're willing to
pipeline
sign
running
up,
at full
and yet most will
capacity
never
for the
even
first
make it to
time
the
in
front
history.
before they die.
A Keystone XL revival advancing
The front has
with
turned
$2
into a
billion
zone of
on the
localized,
table.
purely tactical
Trump
movements with
permits signed
advances and
for
retreats
existing
of just
Canadian
over 100 meters per
pipelines
day.
and a
the
July
Russian
1st
military
deadline
analyst
for the
claims.
West Coast pipeline
Then he drops a
submission.
second bombshell. At
That
this
is an
rate, the war will
extraordinary
continue for
amount of
100
movement
years,
in 1
and
week.
this is not an exaggeration.
Canada's energy
Putin
story
can't
is
wait
being
a
written
century
right
for a
now.
win in Ukraine.
Every
But when
barrel
90%
of
of his
Alberta
soldiers
oil
are
that
dying before they
crosses the
fire a
Pacific
single
on a
shot,
tanker from
there isn't much
Burnaby.
more that he can
Every
hope for.
permit
The
signed.
spring offensive in
Every
particular is
negotiation
exposing just how
advanced.
bad the situation
Every
is in
deadline
Ukraine for
met
Russia
or
right now.
missed.
We've touched on
This
how
is the
poorly
moment
that
that the
offensive is
energy
going already.
superpower
The
vision
details
either
are far
becomes
worse.
real
Something
or
eerie
stays a
is happening
slogan.
in the Donetsk
Canada
region.
has the oil.
Russian soldiers
Canada
are being
has
sent
the
in
gas.
to fight in what is supposed
Canada
to
has
be
the
a glorious
pipelines,
spring
or is
campaign
building
that
them.
delivers victory to Mother
Canada
Russia.
has the
But
Asian
something's
buyers
going
who are
wrong.
willing and eager
Soldiers
to
are
buy
dying
what
in
we
record
produce.
numbers as something rips
Canada
through the
has a
Russian
majority
ranks like
government
never
with the
before in
tools
history.
to make it happen.
Donetsk has become a
The
death
question,
zone.
the
Russia's
only
losses
question,
are so brutal
is
that
whether
they'll be felt
Canada
for
will
100
move with
years.
the urgency
Putin's
this
patsies
moment
are now too
demands.
terrified to fight.
I
You'd
believe
know
it
none
will.
of this if you listened to Putin's
But we will be
narrative.
watching.
According to
Every
Russia's
step,
leader, Ukraine is
every
on the
deadline,
verge of collapse.
every development.
Donetsk and then the Donbass
I'm
are
Walter
going
Smith.
to fall under the might
This
of the
is
spring
Canada
offensive
Tonight.
that Russia launched
Thank you
against
for
Ukraine
watching.
in March.
Stay
Russia's
strong,
savage
Canada.
war machine